So the first part of 4.1 in your book talks about sampling, the sampling methods. Simple random sample, stratified sample, cluster sample, systematic sample, multi-stage sample, the different types, right? We know how to do them because we talked about them. Their definitions are here, and then we did some practice with them, right? The other thing that 4.1 in your book talks about is something called bias. Bias, or how to things that could go wrong when you take a sample. Okay, that could affect your sample poorly. Okay, so if any of these things happen, it was a bad sample. You took a bad sample. You use the sampling system wrong. Each done correctly, if you do each of these guys correctly, you'll get a good sample. But sometimes there's things that the system you set up, the rules you set up, there's holes in them. Okay, so these are the holes, if you will, the things that go bad. First one we talked about, convenient sample. Choosing individuals who are easiest to reach. The easiest thing. The easiest thing is not random. So if you choose the easiest way, that's not a system. That's just walking outside and picking the first 10 people I see. That's not a system. Okay, we talked about that with the farmer. If the farmer wants to know how his crop is doing, the best way is not to pick the 10 closest, right? Because then they have no idea what's happening in the other parts of the land. Okay. Okay. The next one is bias. The actual term bias. So bias. This is what a bias is. Bias is systematically favoring certain outcomes. Systematically favoring certain outcomes. Most of the time, this is not done on purpose. Most of the time, people don't do this on purpose. They do it because there's flaws in their system. There's flaws in their set of rules. Sometimes they don't even know that's happening, right? So what is bias? Bias is systematically favoring certain outcomes. Okay? So it's like you guys, like you guys as students. Bias for me would be to give someone better grades on a test because I thought that they should. No other reason than that, right? They didn't earn it. They got better grades on the test because I thought, yeah, that student should get better grades, better scores, right? That's bias on my part. Even if I systematically don't, even if I'm not consciously doing it, if it happens, that's bias, right? That's why when I grade your tests, I grade them all at once because then I have a system. This is a 3 out of 3. This is a 2 out of 3. This is a 1 out of 3. And I compare your guys' answers, right? The ones that answer fully, once I get an example of what a good answer is, then I compare it with the rest, right? So it's comparable to everyone, right? That's how I get around my bias. So that, and then another thing I do is I flip around. So like your name's on the front of the test, right? Your name's on the front of the test. Well, multiple choice is easy to grade. There's no chance in bias with multiple choice, right? You either got it right or you got it wrong. But what I do is for the free response part, your name's not on here, right? Your name's on the front. So I don't even look at names. That helps me as well because it doesn't even come into my head. I don't know whose paper that is, right? You might know it because you know your handwriting, but I don't know whose paper that is, right? So that's another way I get around bias. If I don't know who the student is, I can't favor them any much. And if I compare them, if this answer is better than this answer, then this answer better get a better score because it's a better answer, right? So that's how I deal with bias, my own bias, if I do have it, when I'm grading tests to make sure everyone's on the same plane. All right, no one starts ahead. Everyone's on the same plane. Okay. Um, so yeah, just be careful. Bias is not something that sometimes it's something you don't know about, right? How do we beat bias? By doing these things correctly. By doing these things correctly, right? If we do these things correctly, we'll limit bias. You can never get rid of bias, but you can limit it. Okay. Another type of bias is something called a simple random sample. Another type of bias is what we call voluntary response. Voluntary response bias. What is voluntary response? It consists of people who choose themselves to be in your survey. You're doing a survey. You want to randomly give it to people. You don't want to give it to everyone you know. You want to randomly give it to people. If I volunteer to take the survey, that's called voluntary response bias. Okay? People who choose themselves. Voluntary response samples show bias because people with strong opinions are the ones who volunteer. For example, if someone is doing a survey at Starbucks, you walk in, someone's doing surveys. They're not going to ask everybody. They're only going to ask certain people, right? And you go over there and volunteer to give answers. It's probably because you have strong opinions. Either you really like it or you really don't like it, right? There's very little in between if you're volunteering. Another great example. How many people have bought stuff from Amazon? Amazon.com. A lot of us, right? A lot of us have. I do it almost every day. Have you guys ever? Do you guys read the reviews before you buy? What do you notice about the reviews? What do you notice about the reviews? Exactly. They're either 4 stars, either the biggest one is 4 stars, which is 4 out of 4, or a 1 star. You never see 2 or 3 stars being the most out of any of them, right? It's always, if you look at an item, it's always the most amount of stars are always 4 star, or the most amount of stars are 1 star. Okay? It's because of voluntary response bias. Who are the people that leave reviews? People who really have opinion about something. I really enjoyed it. I really liked it. I want to let everyone know. I'll put a review. Or I really did not like it. There was something about it I really did not appreciate. I put a review. Right? Very few people actually review something that they feel kind of not so much on. Right? When you guys go to college, a lot of you guys are going to college next year. There's apps, websites. It's called Rate Your Professor. In college, you can rate professors, whether like same thing, 4 or 5 stars, or the top or 1. I never used those. Those back when I was in college, they had those, but I never used them to pick my professor. The reason is the same thing. Either people they got great reviews, or some people said they're terrible. Right? If someone got 50 perfect star reviews and they got 50 1-star reviews, you don't know what to think about the person because you're like, are they great or are they terrible, right? There weren't many in between, right? There's not many in between. So like, yes, if someone got a 5 out of 5 stars, 50 of those and 51 stars, they would average 2.5 stars, right? That's not really saying anything about them though. Either they're great or they're terrible. They're not in the middle somewhere. So voluntary response sample is not good. If you listen, it's not so much anymore because of technology, but radio. If you guys listen to the radio, especially radio that people call in and give their opinion, there are radio stations where people can call in and give their add to the conversation, right? They ask people questions. How do you feel about this? How do you feel about that? It's usually about politics, right? Because that gets people going. So what happens is people call in and add to the conversation, and it's always people who are angry one way or the other, right? It's always people who are angry one way or the other. They're either love what's happening with the country or they hate what's happening with the country or the state or the city, whatever it is, right? It's never in between. If you listen to those, it's never in between. That's a voluntary response sample, right? We don't want people to volunteer themselves for our survey. If I'm given a survey, I want to choose you at random, okay? For that reason. Will there be people in your survey that have really strong opinions? Yeah. Will there be people who have kind of middle of the road? Yeah, but it'll balance out. Okay. Undercoverage occurs when some portion of the population is left out. Some portion of the population is left out. So I do a survey. I want to survey people in Fresno, California. So I get a list of everyone's number. I go to the phone book. I go to the yellow pages and get a list of everyone's number. Randomly call. I do a random number and I call 50 people. Who did I miss? Who did I miss if I call those 50 people? People who don't have a cell phone, or people who numbers aren't listed. People whose numbers aren't listed, right? There's a lot of people whose numbers are not listed, right? For whatever reason, their number's not listed. Mhm. Yeah. Okay. So if your number is listed, and you might not even know your number's listed, there's a chance they'd call you, but there's also a chance that they won't, because if your number is not listed. So if you're doing a phone survey, you're only going to get people who have phones. Okay. So if you want everybody, you need to make sure that you're not forgetting somebody, okay, or a portion of people, okay. Um, what do you mean what ifs? What do you mean by what ifs? Mm-hmm. If you're trying to get it, so if I'm trying to have a survey of people in Fresno, California, phone survey is a bad way to go because there are a lot of people who don't have phones. You might not know it because everyone in your circle, everyone in your environment, everyone has phones, right? But there are a lot of people that do not have phones, right? They don't have them. They just plain don't have them. So if my population is Fresno, California, phone survey is a bad way to do it. Okay? That's a bad way to do it. Now, if I have a population, like if my population was this classroom and everyone in here had a phone, that's not a bad way to do it because everyone in here had a phone, right? If I wanted to um, get a survey of students at Central High School, the best way I think would be sending them an email through their central email because everybody has a central email, right? Everybody has a central email. I'd want to tell them, hey, I'm going to send you a survey. I might send you a survey. Take a look at it, right? But that's the best way to do it because everybody has one of those. Every student. They might not check it all the time, but they have one. Okay. So yeah, under coverage. That's one way um, um, that's one way to get around bias, or to under coverage is a form of bias. Okay. Non-response. Non-response occurs when an individual chosen for the sample can't be contacted or refuses to participate. Someone doesn't answer the phone. They have a phone, but they won't answer, right? Or you just can't reach them. If they're in your sample, you have to find a way to get them. You can't just say, forget them. If you have a sample of 50 and they're not, and you can't get a hold of them, you can't finish that sample until you get every single one of those people. Okay. Otherwise, you have to get a whole new sample and start over again. Okay. So non-response means they don't answer. I can't get a hold of them. Okay. Response bias. Response is if they're giving incorrect answers on purpose. For example, if someone from law enforcement calls you, I've had this before. Law enforcement has called me before because I have students who applied for programs for programs through the sheriff's office, and they call me to ask me their opinion on the student. Right? It happens to a lot of people who, if you have a survey, if law enforcement is asking you questions, especially if they're asking you questions. I had a roommate in college who was going to become a CHP officer. So I was one of his references. So they called me, they came to my house, they interviewed me about them because that's what they do. That's one of their process. So they were asking me questions. Have you ever seen your roommate do this? Have you ever seen your roommate do that? Have you ever seen your roommate do this? I got to admit, I lied on some of them because some of them I didn't want to be the reason why my friend didn't get the job, right? Have you ever seen your friend commit a crime? Yeah, I saw him speed once. I saw him speed, going over the speed limit. Yeah. So I'm like, no, 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 of course not, right? Of course not. Because I didn't want to get him in trouble. That would be an example of response bias. I gave incorrect answers on purpose. There was a reason for it. I didn't want to get my friend in trouble. I wanted to make sure they got the job, right? That's a example. If a cop says, asks you a question, asks you just a random like a survey, and says, "Have you ever used drugs, illegal drugs?" Whether you have or whether you haven't, that's not the question. I'm not asking that. I'm going to say everyone will say absolutely not, right? Because it's a law enforcement officer and you don't want to get in trouble. So everyone, I don't care who you are, you're gonna lie, or you're gonna say no. You're gonna say no, right? Everyone's gonna say no. That's an example of response bias. You lie because of a specific reason, right? Um, a lot of times you see this with when there's political polls out there, political polls. Who are you going to vote for, president? Who are you going to vote for, president? A lot of people will lie because they don't want to be. They feel like if they said a certain person, they would be discriminated against, right? Because that person isn't very popular, but they like their politics. So they'll say, oh, I'm voting for the other person, when indeed they're not. That's what happened in 2020 or 2016 when Trump won the White House. That's what happened. Every poll said Hillary Clinton's going to win. 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 And what happened? She lost because of response bias. A lot of people felt that they didn't want to say publicly that they were going to vote for Donald Trump, but when they went to the ballot box, they actually wanted to. They actually voted for him. That's not my opinion. That's true. That's what happened because the polls all said one thing, but when they actually went to the ballot box, they said another thing, right? They lied because there was a reason why. They didn't want to be felt looked upon a certain way. Okay, so that's an example too. Okay, the last one is wording bias. Wording of questions. Sometimes it's called wording bias. Sometimes it's called wording of questions. When you're asked a question, a leading question, sometimes we call it, where someone asks you a question and they're leading you towards an answer. That's called wording bias or wording of questions. So, like a lot of times, you'll be asked questions like they'll give you facts like the government is looking at your phones. The government is looking inside your phones. Do you want them to continue doing this? Of course not. Who wants to? I don't want anyone looking at my phone, right? I don't want anybody looking at my phone. They don't tell you the whole story though. They only look at people's phones who, first of all, they have to have a warrant. Second of all, they have to have a reason for doing that, right? So do they look at your phones? Yeah, but you have to have a reason. They left that part out, right? So the way they word a question, if they lead you towards one way or the other, um, that's an example of wording of the way you word questions. So if they kind of try to influence you with their words, a direct question would be, um, is it okay if the government uses looks at your phone? Sure. I have nothing to hide. I don't care what that. There's nothing on my phone that I'm ashamed of. Sure, they can look whenever they want, right? But there's a way to do that question so that it's just flat, not skewed one way. Okay, so that's called wording bias. Okay, so those are the types of bias that could affect your sampling. Okay, all right, so I have a little, let's see, nope, some questions here. Okay, so we're going to answer these questions based off the types of bias. These are multiple choice questions from past tests that I am not using no more. So I decided let's put them on a slide and let's ask them in class. Okay, so here we go. Leslie is running for political office. She wants to poll adults in her district to understand their stances on various issues relevant to the upcoming election. Members of her campaign will contact randomly chosen adults by phone. Which of these is the best example of undercoverage? Okay, so read them all, read through them. Which one do you think? Which one do you think? Don't tell me yet. Just keep it to yourself. Undercoverage is a form of bias, so it's not good. Okay, talk about it with the person closest to you. Which one do you think? Okay. A's. How many A's? Raise your hand if you think A. B's. Most of you guys are B's. C's. Any C's? Any D's? Any E's? Okay. A is actually correct. A is correct, but it doesn't fit this problem. Why not? Undercoverage. Yeah. A, this is an example of what? Non-response. Yeah. So if it said non-response, A would be A. Okay. Let's see which one it is. B. Yep. B is the answer. They won't contact adults unlisted. We talked about that one. Or don't use cell phones. C. Some adults who answer the phone may choose to not participate in the poll. That is a bias, but it's not under coverage. They might contact people who weren't registered in that district. Again, it's possible, but it's not under coverage. People may not give accurate answers to the questions depending on how they are worded. Again, that's true, but it's not under coverage. Okay, so they're all true to some extent, but we're looking for under coverage. Okay, here we go. Next one. Before the 1936 US presidential election, a popular poll predicted that Alfred Landon would comfortably win against FDR. The poll randomly sampled people from sources like telephone and car registration records. But the country was in an economic crisis. So many voters without those luxuries were not included when they were asked in the poll. So they weren't even included because they didn't have a telephone and they didn't have a car. Okay. Voters with lower outcomes favored Roosevelt, who ultimately won with 62% of the vote, one of the largest margins in US history. Which of the type best describe this? Talk about it with the person closest to you. Let's see. So why weren't the people included in the polls? They weren't included in the polls, right? So if they're not included and they should be, that is under coverage. Okay, that's under coverage. Okay. Okay, so here we go. A prestigious university wants to estimate the average starting salary of its graduates. Very common. Come to my school. If you graduate from here, you make this much money, right? That gets people to go to your school. The alumni outreach department sends an email to the most recent addresses that they have on files for every graduate. The email asks the graduates to participate in a survey about the employment history and starting salary. Which of the following is not a legitimate concern about their survey being representative of all graduates? Well, first of all, what type of bias is this? The question. What type of bias would this cover? That might help you answer the question. Which of those bias is this? What's that? Uh, kind of a convenience sample, but there's a better one. Which one? Response or non? Which one? There's non-voluntary response, non-response, or response? Just response? Not that one. Who are the people that are going to answer the survey? It was given to everyone, so it's not under coverage. Who are the people who are going to, who are more likely to fill it out and return it? People who have high-paying jobs, right? If someone has a low-paying job, they're not going to brag, right? But if someone has a high-paying job, they're going to want to, right? Which one is that? That's voluntary response. You're volunteering, right? This is not even a sample. They're giving it to everybody. I'm volunteering here. This is how much I make, right? That's why that would be a voluntary response. Okay, so let's go through. Some graduates may no longer check the email at the address has on file, so not a concern. So if it is a concern, cross it out. Okay. B, graduates might claim their salary is higher than in real and really is, but relatively few would report lower salary than what is really is. Current students are not in the sample. Unemployed graduates may choose not to participate in the salary. So B and D are kind of like what we were talking about. E, some graduates may not want to share the type of personal information with the university. So the same type of thing, right? So which one is not one on our list? Not a concern over here. C, right? C. It's talking about alumni. So why would you want to include current students, right? Current students are not alumni. You have to graduate from the school. You have to be, not only, you could be alumni without graduating, but you're not alumni if you're still in the school. Okay? Okay. A large city passed a new tax on sugary beverages. So anything with sugar in it, anything you buy from the store with sugar in it, that's the tax. They put extra tax on that. A few months after the tax goes into effect, the mayor wants to use social media to learn about how residents feel about the tax. The mayor creates a poll on Twitter and invites residents to share how they feel about it. 70% of them say, I don't like it. They oppose it. Which of these is the best explanation why this result is probably biased? So what's the problem with the way they conducted their sample? Okay, talk about it with the same person you've been talking about. Okay, so first two say non-residents might participate in the poll. Is that a concern? Non-residents, people who don't live in the city, to fill out the survey on Twitter. It is a concern, but why not a big concern? Why is it a very low concern? When was the last time? Yeah, exactly. You don't care. Yeah, I don't care. Like, I don't get, if you have Twitter or Instagram or Facebook or whatever you have, you're probably not following the mayor of some town you don't live in. You might not even follow the mayor of the town you do live in, right? So you're not going to get. So is there a concern that there are people that are answering that don't live there? Yeah, but I mean, that's very few, right? That's not going to lot, right? If they don't really care, why am I going to vote in the poll that I don't even want to, So it is a concern, but not a big one. So A and B, I would say not really a big concern. C, opponents of the new tax are likely to respond than anyone else. So 70% seems like an underestimate. D, opponents of the new tax are more likely to respond than anyone else. So 70 is likely an overestimate. So 70% too high or too low. That's what they're saying. So opponents of the new tax are more likely to respond, right? They are the ones who have an opinion, right? Anyone who doesn't like something is always going to be the loudest the loudest voice, right? So so that makes 70% in reality go down or go up. So you think more people than 70%? If they're the loudest ones, they're flooding, right? They're the ones who are voting. That's inflating that number. So it's actually, that number would actually be, if they actually got everyone involved, that number would actually go down. So 70% is an overestimate, right? It's actually, because right now, the majority of the people are the people who are really angry about that, right? But the people who don't really care, I could go one way or the other, they didn't answer that. Voluntary response. Okay, voluntary response. Okay, I think it's the last one. An airline wants to survey customers about their overall satisfaction. They take a random sample of 1,000 customers who have flown in the past month and email them a survey. The email also offers those who complete the survey a $25 gift card that can be used almost anywhere. Which of these is the best example of non-response? Non-response. Okay, read through them. Which one is the best example of non-response? So let's go through them. Because they all are some sort of bias. They all are some sort of bias. But some of them aren't non-response. So A, satisfied customers might be less likely to complete the survey than satisfied customers. That's true. Dissatisfied customers. But that's not non-response, that's voluntary response. They're volunteering themselves, right? So A can't work. B, people might feel pressured to say that they are more satisfied than they really are. That's a bias. Which one is it? That's response bias. You're lying for a reason. You're not being truthful for a reason. Okay? C, some people might only complete the survey for the gift card. Okay? Customers who have flown in the past might not be representative of all customers. Which bias is that? Undercoverage. That's undercoverage. That's saying there's people who aren't accounted for. E, customers without email cannot be part of the survey, and their satisfaction may be different than those in the sample. Is that one of the bias? Which one is that? So people without email addresses cannot be part of. So people who cannot be part of the survey is undercoverage. That's undercoverage, yeah. If you cannot be part of the survey, you're undercovered. So that leaves letter A. What? Satisfied customers might be less likely to complete the survey than dissatisfied customers. I think that's a mistake. I think it is C. I think it is C. I think this was when I put the answer, I put the wrong answer in because it should be C. Because A is definitely a concern, but it's not the main concern. Okay, it's not a concern of non-response. Oh, sorry. We'll do. Let's see. One more. We're done. This one's quick. A mobile phone service provider wants to survey its customers to study privacy concerns and the sharing of their personal information. This is big, especially now, because all your information is on your phone. They call 5,000 randomly selected phone numbers from a database containing the phone numbers of every customer. If someone selected doesn't answer, they'll call them up to 2 more times and then give up. They reach 350 customers with this strategy, and 60% of those say they are at least somewhat concerned. Which of these is the most concerning potential source of bias? Undercoverage, voluntary response, convenience sample, response bias, or non-response bias? They had 5,000 in their sample. They didn't get anything close to that. They got 350, right? And those people did not answer because they're non-response, right? They're non-response. So it'd be E, non-response. Okay? All right.